Freud was very concerned with our past, what happened to us in our childhood, what kind of deep traumas are there. And I think that's definitely a dimension of time. But this kind of mystic, this experience of mystic self-transcendence is a bit different, because what's happening is what Eliade calls profane time or historical time is being intersected by a sacred time, or the timeline of the ancestors, or something like that. In Buddhism, like to meditate for one moment even is to be as the Buddha ancestors were. You're being in their image, and there's this whole lineage going back to the Buddha, of which you are partaking in one moment. And so that's that's, I think, what's meant here by mystic self-transcendence. And similarly with Simba, is going on along his life defined by his past, and the shaman, Rafiki, offers a portal, or opens a portal of sorts, and says, actually, there's this other dimension you exist on, Simba. And then he sees Mufasa, who in turn told him about the great kings of the past who live in the sky. So that's a bit about what's meant there. So an emotional or religious frenzy or trance-like state. Right, so our linear model of time's being disrupted, and there's many ways that happens. So visionary experience, dreams, creative work, meditation, as I've mentioned, contemplating on images. So I think, like, I went to Florence recently, or if you go into any art gallery really, with where it refers you to the past. If you look at Greek sculptures or Renaissance paintings, you're contemplating images that I think connect you to what Carl Jung would call the archetypes. Connect you to a very primordial, original sense of life, really, that gives you a different dimension upon which to understand who you are. It expands your sense of self. Fire ceremonies, we'll come on to that in a minute. Active imagination, psychedelic experience, fasting, dancing, sex, and listening to music. The psychedelic experience particularly is important in shamanism as well. I think the main point that Eliade's highlighted is this point of ecstasy, which is what I want to emphasize. And I think there's many ways to enter an ecstatic state which disrupts your normative models of perception, your ideas of my past and my future and my personal narrative, and give you a much deeper sense of who you are. So I think this is all of this is bundled up in what's meant by shamanism. And so I've drawn a cross there. That's interesting too, because that's this cross is an image of centrality. It's an image of what in shaman, it's in Latin it's called the axis mundi, the world center, the center of the world. And this is again a psychological place, a place where Simba is walking around with Timon and Pumbaa, goes anywhere he wants to, does anything he wants to. It's pretty disoriented and doesn't really have a sense of his central place in the world. And it's through this revelatory experience that this axis, or this center of gravity, is given to him. That's what this big dream did for him. It interceded this historical time, and now he's actually living with a center of gravity. He's living in relationship to a world center. So that's another big kind of value of ecstatic experience. There's also a feeling of going beyond the range of normal experience into another plane of consciousness, rich in meaning. So shamans are also voyagers of psyche, so they are able to journey through these alternate states of consciousness through ecstatic rites. And so that's, yeah, there's different directions to that. There's the descent into the underworld, and there's the ascent to the world of benevolent spirits and to the world of the ancestors. And I think both of those are part of what is meant to be a shaman, because the shaman is really a traveller, and as Kali said, is acquainted, so to speak, with the spirit world. So that means that if a shaman is performing a healing function with someone, and someone is feeling depressed, or as they would say in primitive societies, they would think of it as like possessed by evil spirits, or that the person has lost their soul, then the shaman would kind of look at that person and understand that the evil spirits have stolen their soul, and that actually what's needed is a flight to meet the evil spirits and reclaim the soul. And this kind of thinking is very fascinating to me, because I don't know if we get that so much in the Christian tradition or in conventional religious traditions. We might do, but probably in the more mystical, in the mystical cause of them. And that's why I think the shamanic tradition is very interesting, because it's very experiential. It's experiential, and I think there's a spiritual kind of responsibility associated with it. You know, the shaman can feel that something can be done, and we can go and we can interact with different planes of the psyche and the planes of consciousness. Yeah, so yeah, the shaman's able to communicate with good and evil spirits, essentially, and is able to see beyond appearances and gaze into the soul. And that's kind of what I mean by this here. Because the material world as we know it is what appears to us, the phenomena that appear to us, what is obvious and what is seen and able to be touched and able to be seen. Whereas, as I said in the beginning, the shaman is conscious of the inner life, the secret life, the fears, the hopes, the loss of meaning, the yearning for a meaningful story and for a purpose, those kind of things. The shaman's the keeper of the borders, right? Unites heaven and earth. That's what the world tree does, where sacred energy flows now into the material world through opening up this new portal. And so the shaman is really a bridge, an energetic bridge between worlds. And yeah, so the shaman will undergo ecstatic journeys for the purpose of healing, bringing unity to a fragmented soul. So yeah, well, I think we're going to get into that in a bit more detail. I'm going to go to the next slide. So my emphasis really in our definition of shamanism, I'm going to follow from Eliade, is the ecstasy, the ability to transcend our normative mode of our normal modes of perception through ecstatic rites. Now, whether that is something as simple as a dance, where music and bodies unite in the same spirit, and our individual kind of linear sense of self dissolves into an ecstatic unity, you know, I would consider something like that shamanic. And so there's quite a broad kind of psychological way that I'm thinking of it. Anything that gives us a perception of other ways of being, other planes of consciousness. So why is it important? I think there's two reasons why it's important. It's age, and its cross-cultural kind of existence. And I think both of those things, what I think is that both of those things indicate that what we're talking about is something real, and true. And you can debate endlessly the meanings of reality and truth. But I'll offer you my perspective on it, and it's that if something has endured for eons and eons of time, there's something central or existential or archetypal to the human experience there. So that's because it's consistent across temporal shifts, which I think is true, and I'm going to try and illustrate that. And it's also consistent across cultural milieus as well, which I'll illustrate. So here's Homo erectus, who's one of our ancestors in an evolutionary sense. Existed about 2 million years ago to 500,000 years ago, and is known to have commanded fire. So I want to kind of enter into this idea of like our deep humanity. Like each one of us in this room, if you ask someone in this room, like, how old are you? Like, oh, I'm 30, I'm 40, like, whatever. I think that, even that language game is existing here. It's like, I was born on this day, and this is like how many years I've been on the planet. And it's like, that's most certainly true in a sense. But then, of course, there's a sense in which that isn't true at all, because as a life form, as any type of life form, you are a direct ancestor of every living entity that's ever existed. And I think it's been about 3.5 billion years that life has existed. Could be wrong, but I think that's about it for this planet. And so that is a really, really long time. That's like deep time. And you might think, well, what do